The day they put a price on my life was the day fate decided I would never belong to the people who tried to sell me. I used to believe betrayal arrived with shouting, slammed doors, or cruel words you could never forget. I was wrong. Sometimes it arrived wearing a perfect smile, holding a fountain pen, and asking you to sign a paper you were never allowed to read. My name is Emily Carter, and 24 years old was far too young to learn that family could become strangers without warning. The October rain painted silver lines across the windows of our aging townhouse outside Boston, turning the afternoon into a gray watercolor. Every few seconds, thunder rolled across the sky, soft enough to sound almost comforting, but heavy enough to make the glass tremble beneath my fingertips. I had just finished another shift at the neighborhood bookstore, my shoes still damp from walking 6 blocks through the rain because my old sedan refused to start again. Rent was overdue. My student loans felt impossible. Still, I believed tomorrow would somehow be better. Then Victoria called my name. She stood in the dining room, wearing pearls she could never afford and a smile that made my stomach tighten. Since my father passed away 3 years earlier, she had mastered the art of pretending everything was normal while quietly selling pieces of the life he had left behind. Furniture disappeared. Family photographs vanished. Even his wedding ring had been gone before the funeral flowers faded. "Sit down," she said gently. Too gently. A stranger in an expensive charcoal suit waited beside the table, a leather folder resting neatly in front of him. He never introduced himself. He simply watched me with calm gray eyes that revealed absolutely nothing. The grandfather clock ticked louder than usual. Somewhere upstairs, a loose window frame rattled in the wind. Every tiny sound seemed sharper, as though the house itself knew something I didn't. Victoria folded her hands. "Emily, I made an arrangement that will solve all our problems." My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Fear sometimes moved that way, becoming strangely quiet before it became overwhelming. "What arrangement?" I asked. She looked toward the man in the suit before answering. "Someone powerful has agreed to assume responsibility for you." Responsibility. Such a polite word. Such an ugly lie. The man slid a document across the polished table without saying a single word. I looked down long enough to notice my full legal name already printed across the first page. My signature line waited at the bottom like a trap that had been prepared long before I walked into the room. "Who is he?" I whispered. Victoria hesitated for only a heartbeat. "Damien Moretti." The name landed with the weight of a storm. Even ordinary people knew the rumors. A businessman. A kingmaker. A man powerful enough that newspapers spoke around him instead of about him. My mouth went dry. "You sold me?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. Victoria never answered. Instead, headlights swept across the rain-soaked windows, and 3 black SUVs rolled silently into the driveway. That was the exact moment I realized the deal had already been completed before I ever opened the front door. The front door opened before anyone knocked. The stranger in the charcoal suit stepped aside with quiet respect, and every sound inside the house seemed to disappear beneath the steady rhythm of the rain. 3 men entered first, all wearing tailored black suits, their movements calm and disciplined instead of threatening. They spread through the foyer without speaking, not searching the house, but quietly observing it, as if they had already memorized every room long before they arrived. Then he walked in. Damien Moretti did not need an introduction. The air changed before he said a single word. He was taller than I expected, somewhere around 6 feet 3 inches, wearing a dark overcoat that carried tiny drops of rain across the shoulders. His black hair was neatly combed back, revealing sharp features that belonged on the cover of a business magazine rather than inside my late father's dining room. His expression remained unreadable, almost distant, yet everyone else instinctively made room for him. Even Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment. He glanced around the room only once before looking directly at me. Those green eyes did not feel cold. They felt calculating, like someone solving a complicated equation in complete silence. I wanted to look away, but I could not. He finally broke the silence. "Emily Carter." His voice was calm, deep, and surprisingly measured. It carried confidence without needing volume. "Yes," I answered, barely above a whisper. He nodded once, as though confirming something only he understood. "Bring your coat." I blinked, certain I had misunderstood him. "That is all you are going to say?" My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "My stepmother just admitted she sold me. and your response is to tell me to bring my coat. Victoria shifted nervously behind me. The attorney cleared his throat, but wisely remained silent. Damien looked at me without changing expression. You are free to ask questions after we leave. I am not leaving. The words escaped before I could stop them. His gaze never hardened. Instead, something almost sympathetic flickered across his face before disappearing. You already would have if I had not come myself. Confusion pushed aside my fear. What does that even mean? He looked briefly toward Victoria, who suddenly found the hardwood floor fascinating. It means you have not been told everything. My heartbeat quickened. I searched Victoria's face for an explanation, but she refused to meet my eyes. Every memory from the past year rushed back at once. The unpaid bills she hid from me. The mysterious phone calls that always ended when I entered the room. The expensive jewelry she suddenly began wearing despite insisting we could barely afford groceries. I realized none of it had been random. She had been preparing for this day all along. Damien reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed a slim envelope on the dining table between us. Everything you need to understand begins in there, he said quietly. Read it when you are ready. Not before. I stared at the envelope but did not touch it. Why should I trust you? For the first time, the corners of his mouth moved just enough to resemble the beginning of a smile. You should not. He paused for a single heartbeat before adding the words that unsettled me even more. But you should stop trusting the people who convinced you I was the villain. I looked at the envelope for several long seconds before slipping it into my backpack without opening it. Somehow, leaving it sealed felt like the last decision that still belonged to me. The rain had eased into a light mist as I stepped onto the front porch. The cold October air filled my lungs, carrying the scent of wet leaves and fresh pavement. One of the men quietly opened the rear passenger door of the black SUV, but nobody reached for me or tried to hurry me. That surprised me more than anything else. If I truly had been sold, why did everyone seem determined to let me choose each step on my own? I glanced back toward the house. Victoria remained frozen inside the doorway, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She simply watched as though I were another piece of furniture finally being hauled away. I waited for my father to appear out of habit before remembering he never would again. The realization hurt far more than I expected. I climbed into the vehicle without another word. The leather seats were warm, and the cabin was almost silent except for soft classical music playing somewhere beyond the tinted partition. No one sat beside me. Damien occupied the seat across from mine, reviewing several documents on a tablet before setting it aside as the SUV pulled smoothly onto the highway. Boston slowly disappeared behind us, replaced by winding roads lined with towering maple trees glowing shades of red and gold beneath the fading afternoon sky. Nearly 40 minutes passed before either of us spoke. I finally broke the silence. Where are you taking me? Damien looked out the window for a brief moment before answering. Home. I almost laughed. That word stopped meaning anything today. He accepted the remark without defending himself. Perhaps, but you still deserve a place where you are not treated like a transaction. I folded my arms tightly. You keep talking as though you rescued me. I prevented something much worse. His answer came quietly, without pride or drama. I wanted details, but something told me he would not. Explain until the right moment. Just after sunset, iron gates nearly 12 feet high opened without slowing the vehicle. Beyond them stretched an estate unlike anything I had ever seen. Long stone pathways curved through carefully maintained gardens. Warm lights illuminated fountains, old oak trees, and a mansion built from pale limestone that reflected the last traces of daylight. It looked less like a fortress and more like a private museum hidden from the rest of the world. Several employees waited beneath the front entrance, dressed professionally rather than formally. None of them stared at me with curiosity. Instead, they greeted Damien respectfully before offering me the same quiet courtesy. An older woman with silver hair stepped forward first. Welcome, Miss Carter. I am Margaret. I oversee the household. Household, not staff, not servants, just household. The difference was subtle, but I noticed it. Damien handed her my backpack with surprising care. The East Suite is prepared. I frowned. Sweet. Margaret smiled gently. Your room overlooks the gardens. Dinner will be ready whenever you feel comfortable. I looked from her to Damien, waiting for the hidden condition, the demand, the price that surely came with all of this kindness. Instead, he met my eyes and said only one sentence before walking away toward the far end of the hall. No one in this house will enter your room unless you invite them. Sleep never came that first night. I stood beside the tall bedroom windows watching moonlight settle across the gardens below, trying to understand how a place so peaceful could belong to a man whose name inspired so many rumors. The room itself was larger than my entire apartment back in Boston. A fireplace crackled softly against one wall. Fresh flowers rested on a small table beside a handwritten note from Margaret wishing me a restful evening. Nothing felt like captivity. Somehow, that unsettled me even more. The next morning, sunlight streamed through ivory curtains, and for a few brief seconds I forgot everything that had happened. Then I noticed my backpack resting neatly beside the armchair. The sealed envelope was still inside. My pulse quickened as I finally carried it to the desk overlooking the gardens. The paper felt unusually heavy in my hands. Inside were copies of financial records, property documents, bank transfers, and several signed agreements. Most of them meant nothing to me until I recognized Victoria's signature repeated again and again. My eyes stopped on one page. A loan agreement. Then another. A second mortgage. Then another document showing every payment my father had secretly made before he died trying to keep our home. I kept turning pages until one sentence made my hands tremble. Victoria had attempted to transfer legal authority over my financial trust without my knowledge using forged paperwork that had already been rejected in court. Beneath that document rested a private investigator's report describing months of fraudulent activity connected to people I had never heard of. At the very bottom sat one final page. It was not a contract. It was a letter addressed to Damien Moretti from the attorney who had visited our house. It explained that if Damien refused Victoria's proposal, she intended to hand me over to another group seeking control of my inheritance through an unlawful guardianship arrangement. I read the paragraph 3 times before the words finally settled inside me. Nobody had purchased me. Someone had tried to stop another deal before it happened. A quiet knock interrupted my thoughts. Margaret stepped inside only after I answered. She carried a breakfast tray but immediately noticed the open documents. Her gentle expression softened with understanding. "Most people need time," she said quietly. "Time for what?" I asked. "To realize that rumors often travel faster than truth." After she left, I wandered through the estate without any destination. The hallways displayed family photographs instead of expensive trophies. Landscapes replaced portraits of power. Employees greeted one another by name, laughing softly as they worked. Nobody lowered their voice because Damien might appear. Nobody looked frightened. Near the library, I found him standing beside a floor-to-ceiling window with a cup of black coffee, reading the morning financial reports. He looked up. Before I spoke, almost as though he had expected me, I held the papers tightly against my chest. "You knew she forged everything." He nodded once. "Yes. You could have exposed her months ago. I needed evidence that would protect you permanently, not temporarily." I searched his face for arrogance, satisfaction, or triumph. There was none, only quiet certainty. Why would you spend so much time helping someone you had never even met? For the first time since I arrived, Damien looked away instead of answering immediately. His reflection lingered in the glass for a long moment before he spoke so softly I almost missed the words. "Because I made a promise many years ago that no daughter would ever lose her future the way someone I loved once did." The promise lingered in my thoughts long after Damien walked away. It was the first answer he had given me that raised more questions than it solved. I spent the next several days wandering through the estate, expecting the illusion to break at any moment. Instead, every hour challenged another assumption I had carried with me. The people who worked there smiled because they wanted to, not because they were afraid. Margaret insisted I call her by her first name. The gardeners proudly showed me the greenhouse they had built over the past 10 years. Even the security team greeted me each morning with quiet respect instead of suspicious stares. Nobody treated me like a prisoner. They treated me like a guest who had not yet decided whether she wanted to stay. That feeling confused me more than fear ever had. One afternoon, I wandered into the estate library, a room lined with dark walnut shelves that stretched nearly 20 feet toward the ceiling. I expected rare books and expensive decorations. Instead, I found Damien seated at a long table reviewing scholarship applications. Hundreds of them. Each folder carried the name of a student, a college, and a handwritten note from teachers or community leaders. He looked up briefly before returning to the next application. You fund scholarships? I asked before I could stop myself. Education changes futures, he replied. Power without opportunity changes nothing. I picked up one folder. The applicant was a first-generation college student from Chicago hoping to become an engineer. Another came from a nursing student in rural Montana. None of them knew who paid for their education. The foundation listed only anonymous donors. Why hide your name? I asked. Damien closed another folder. Because gratitude should never become another debt. His answer stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. That evening I walked through the gardens alone, following a stone path toward a quiet gazebo overlooking a small lake. Autumn leaves drifted across the water while the last light of sunset reflected in shades of gold and crimson. It was peaceful enough that I almost forgot the outside world still existed. Then my phone vibrated for the first time since arriving. The screen displayed an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. No one spoke at first, only breathing. Then Victoria's voice emerged, strangely calm. Emily, you need to come home. I stared across the water without replying. Everything has been a misunderstanding, she continued. People are asking questions. We can fix this together. For the first time in my life, I heard the fear hidden beneath her carefully chosen words. It was not concern for me. It was concern for herself. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted from somewhere behind her. A man's voice. Low. Unfamiliar. Tell her we are running out of time. The line disconnected immediately. My heartbeat quickened. Victoria had never shared our home with anyone after my father died. I turned toward the mansion just as one of Damien's security officers approached at a brisk walk, holding a small communication device. His normally calm expression had changed. Miss Carter, he said carefully. Mr. Moretti has asked that you return inside immediately. I looked back toward the darkening lake one last time, suddenly realizing the quiet days I had spent questioning Damien were about to end, because whatever had been following Victoria had finally reached our door. By the time I reached the main hall, the peaceful atmosphere that had surrounded the estate for days had shifted into something quieter, sharper, almost weightless. Nobody panicked. Nobody raised their voice. The security team simply moved with calm precision, speaking softly through earpieces while several black vehicles disappeared beyond the front gates. Damien stood beside the fireplace, studying a digital map displayed across a large screen. When he noticed me, he dismissed everyone else with a single nod. Within seconds, we were alone. Am I in danger? I asked. He considered the question carefully before answering. Not if I continue doing what I have been doing since the day your stepmother contacted me. I folded my arms. Protecting me? Yes. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. There was no performance, no attempt to impress me, only quiet certainty. I stepped closer to the map. Several locations around Boston were highlighted in blue. One address immediately caught my attention. My childhood home. Why are you watching the house? Damien rested both hands on the edge of the table. Because Victoria was never acting alone. He enlarged one section of the map, revealing photographs of unfamiliar men entering and leaving the property over the past several weeks. None of them looked like neighbors. The people she contacted believed your father's remaining assets included something far more valuable than money, he explained. They were wrong, but they refused to believe it. I stared at the photographs, trying to understand how my ordinary life had become tangled in secrets I never knew existed. So they wanted me because of an inheritance? At first, his expression darkened only slightly. Eventually, they realized you were more valuable as leverage than as an heir. A chill traveled down my spine despite the warmth of the room. You keep saying you prevented something worse. Was this what you meant? He nodded once. Yes. Silence settled between us. The grandfather clock near the staircase marked another passing minute, while rain tapped gently against the tall windows. I finally asked the question I had been avoiding since the day we met. Why me? Damien looked directly into my eyes. Because years ago I promised myself that if I ever had the power to stop someone from losing their future the way my family once did, I would never look away again. There was pain hidden behind the words, quiet and deeply buried, but unmistakably real. Before I could respond, Margaret entered carrying a small wooden box. She placed it carefully on the table and left without interrupting. Damien opened the lid. Inside rested an old silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. "This belonged to your father," he said. My breath caught. I recognized it instantly. He used to wear it around his neck when I was a little girl, but after he passed away it had vanished. "How did you find it?" I whispered. "He entrusted it to someone before he died," Damien answered. "Eventually it found its way to me with one instruction." My hands trembled as I lifted the tiny key from the velvet lining. "What instruction?" Damien waited until I met his eyes before speaking. "Give this back to Emily only when she is finally surrounded by people who value her life more than what they can gain from it." The silver key rested in my palm long after Damien left the room. It was surprisingly light, yet it carried the weight of every unanswered question I had ever asked about my father. I remembered him touching the ribbon around his neck whenever he promised that everything would be all right, even during the years when money was disappearing faster than hope. Back then I thought it was simply an old keepsake. Now I realized he had been protecting something far more important than I ever imagined. Later that afternoon, Damien invited me into a quiet study overlooking the western gardens. Rain clouds had finally drifted away, leaving golden sunlight to spill across polished oak floors. A single wooden chest rested on the desk between us. He gestured toward it, but did not open it himself. "It belongs to you," he said. My hands hesitated before placing the key into the lock. The mechanism turned smoothly, as though it had been waiting years for that exact moment. Inside were family photographs, my father's handwritten journals, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in familiar handwriting. My vision blurred before I even unfolded the letter. "Emily, if you are reading this, then someone finally kept the promise I prayed they would." I took a slow breath and continued reading. My father explained that years earlier he had invested in a charitable foundation intended to provide scholarships for children who had lost parents too soon. After becoming seriously ill, he discovered people around him wanted control of those funds for themselves. He refused. Knowing he might not have much time left, he transferred every legal protection he could into a trust that could only be accessed by me when I reached the proper age and when the documents could no longer be manipulated. At the bottom of the final page, one sentence stopped my breathing for several seconds. "If Damien Moretti is standing beside you, trust his judgment before you trust appearances. He once gave our family a kindness that he never allowed anyone else to know about." I lowered the letter slowly and looked across the desk. Damien remained silent, giving me space to finish. "You knew my father," I whispered. He nodded once. "Many years ago." "Why did he never tell me?" "Because he hoped you would never need my world." His answer carried quiet regret rather than pride. Before I could ask another question, one of the security officers entered the study after a respectful knock. He handed Damien a tablet displaying several photographs before leaving just as quietly. Damien studied the screen for only a moment. His expression remained controlled, but I noticed his shoulders stiffen almost imperceptibly. "What happened?" I asked. He turned the tablet toward me. The images showed strangers walking through my childhood home, while Victoria stood beside them pointing toward different rooms. Furniture had been moved. Cabinets were open. They were searching for something. "They still believe your father hid documents somewhere inside the house," Damien said calmly. "They have not realized the truth yet." "What truth?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Everything they wanted was never hidden inside that house." I instinctively tightened my fingers around the silver key. Damien noticed the movement immediately, but said nothing. For the first time since my life had been turned upside down, I understood that the smallest object my father had ever owned might also be the one thing everyone else had been looking for all along. That night, I could not stop turning the silver key between my fingers. Every tiny scratch across its surface represented a memory I had never understood until now. My father had not left me money alone. He had left me a responsibility. The following morning, Damien invited me to accompany him to the headquarters of the charitable foundation my father had created years before. We drove into Manhattan beneath a bright autumn sky, the city glowing with crisp sunlight after days of rain. The building itself surprised me. It was not hidden behind steel gates or surrounded by intimidating guards. Instead, children filled the lobby with laughter as volunteers prepared boxes of school supplies for community programs. Teachers, counselors, and scholarship recipients greeted Damien warmly by his first name. They did not see a feared businessman. They saw the man who quietly kept their doors open every year. As we walked through the halls, photographs covered the walls. Students graduating from college, families receiving housing assistance, young artists displaying their first exhibitions. My father appeared in several older pictures standing beside Damien at fundraising events nearly 15 years earlier. They looked like partners united by the same purpose rather than men separated by different worlds. I stopped in front of one photograph where my father rested a hand on Damien's shoulder while both smiled at a group of children planting trees in a neighborhood park. He looked happy, I whispered. Damien stood beside me for a long moment. He believed kindness could outlive fear, he answered quietly. I have spent years trying to prove he was right. Later that afternoon, the board of the foundation gathered inside a sunlit conference room overlooking the Hudson River. I expected lawyers and accountants. Instead, I met teachers, physicians, veterans, and community leaders. Damien introduced me simply as Michael Carter's daughter. The room fell silent before every person stood to welcome me. One elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Your father helped my grandson attend college," she said softly. "He never wanted anyone to know." More stories followed. Families whose lives had quietly changed because of decisions my father had made without seeking recognition. I finally understood why people had searched so desperately for his records. They had assumed hidden wealth meant hidden fortune. They never imagined the real legacy was hidden hope. At the end of the meeting, the chairwoman placed a leather portfolio in front of me. Inside was the official document naming me the future chair of the foundation whenever I chose to accept the responsibility. I looked immediately toward Damien in disbelief. "You knew about this all along." He nodded. "It was never mine to lead forever." "Why did you wait?" His expression softened. "Because leadership given too early feels like another burden. Leadership accepted freely becomes purpose." As the meeting concluded, every board member signed the final page confirming my appointment when I was ready. Standing beside the conference room windows, I watched the afternoon sun reflect across the river and realized my life had quietly changed again. I had entered Damien's world believing I had been traded like property. Instead, I had been guided toward the future my father had spent years protecting. When I turned to thank Damien, I noticed he was no longer looking at me. His attention had shifted toward the entrance where one of his advisors had just arrived carrying urgent news. And for the first time since I met him, genuine concern crossed his face. The advisor leaned close enough that only Damien could hear the message, yet I saw everything change in his eyes before he spoke a single word. He thanked the board members with the same calm respect he always carried, then turned toward me. "There is someone waiting downstairs who asked to see you." We rode the elevator in silence. My heartbeat echoed louder with every passing floor. When the doors opened, I immediately recognized Victoria standing alone in the reception lobby. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had watched me leave our house weeks earlier. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled. The confidence in her posture had disappeared. She clutched her handbag with both hands as though it were the only thing she still possessed. The moment she saw me, tears filled her eyes. "Emily," she whispered. I stopped several feet away. Damien remained beside me without saying a word. He did not stand in front of me. He simply stood close enough that I knew I would never have to face the moment alone. Victoria looked from me to Damien before lowering her eyes. "I made terrible choices," she said quietly. "The people I trusted promised they would solve everything. Instead, they left me with nothing." I listened without anger. Somehow the weeks inside Damien's world had changed something inside me. I no longer needed revenge to feel stronger. I only needed the truth. "Why?" I finally asked. Why was I never enough? Victoria covered her face for a moment before answering. "Because I spent so many years chasing security that I stopped recognizing love when it was standing in front of me." Her voice broke beneath the weight of regret. "Your father spent his life protecting people. I spent mine protecting my fears." Silence settled between us. Outside the lobby windows, autumn leaves drifted across the sidewalk, while families hurried through the afternoon carrying shopping bags and cups of coffee, completely unaware that my entire life had quietly come full circle inside that room. Victoria reached into her handbag and placed a small framed photograph on the reception desk. It showed my father holding my hand on the day I learned to ride my first bicycle. I had searched for that picture for years. "He kept this beside his bed," she whispered. "I should have given it to you long ago." I picked it up carefully, tracing the edge of the weathered frame with my thumb. "Thank you," I said softly. Those two words surprised both of us. They were not forgiveness. They were simply the end of carrying bitterness that no longer belonged inside my heart. Victoria nodded once before walking slowly toward the exit without asking for anything else. I watched the door close behind her, feeling sadness instead of triumph. Damien looked at me with quiet understanding. "Are you all right?" he asked. I smiled for the first time without forcing it. "I think I finally am." Several weeks later, I accepted the responsibility of leading my father's foundation. During the ceremony, teachers, students, volunteers, and community leaders rose to their feet as I stepped onto the stage. Damien remained in the back of the room, applauding no louder than anyone else, refusing every spotlight exactly as my father once had. Looking across the audience, I realized the greatest inheritance I received had never been hidden inside a bank account or locked inside a safe. It was the courage to choose compassion over fear, truth over appearances, and purpose over power. The woman who believed she had been sold discovered instead that she had been entrusted with a future no one could ever buy.